What's up, guys? Welcome to the THP Strength Podcast. This is Isaiah Rivera. He has a 50.5-inch vertical off 2 feet. My name's John Evans. I have a 43 at my best inch vertical off 1 foot. Maybe we'll insert the clips here just so you believe us, because it seems like people seem to forget. And in this video, we're going to be talking about box squats. So we use them quite a bit in a variety of programs, and they're also very popular in powerlifting. You guys have probably seen, guys that train with Louis Simmons. They do a metric ton of weight with chains and bands and all that stuff. So we can talk about your experience with it, my experience with it, and then how we integrate them in the program, and maybe some downsides, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what's your experience with box squats?
I used to do them way more when I was younger. I think just because I read a lot of powerlifting, like
text, literature.
And then now I rarely use them. I think I did them in a full training cycle. The last time I did it was 2022, 3 years ago.
Z9.
Yeah.
It's in Z9.
Box squat, sumo deadlift. We were doing them with a pause, I believe, and we were doing pretty low as well. Like I was going all like between a half squat and a deep squat. And then
this is before the IT band tear.
Yes, before the IT band tear. And then, but during IT band issues. My favorite way to implement them now is for tendon rehab because, and it's not that there's anything special about the box itself. I like to use it to gauge depth. Your depth can be very consistent. I think depth can be very inconsistent when you're half squatting. Anything that's not essentially like a bottomed out deep squat, it's hard to keep depth consistent. I even like using it sometimes when I'm teaching athletes to squat, just to keep it consistent. Because if you're gauging your max off of let's say when you're training typically, you're just below parallel, but then when you max out, you're just above parallel, it'll throw off all your percentages. So I like it to implement it with that as well.
Yeah, so today Dom was doing them. So I do program them occasionally. Isaiah's obviously done them, as we stated. And I use them because they take the stress shortening cycle out. Now, stress shortening cycle is essentially what happens when you load a muscle really quickly. The musculotendinous unit, the muscle and the tendon stretch, stores a ton of energy, and you get more of a rebound effect out of the bottom of a given exercise. However, this only happens when the velocity is very high. But there is still something to be said about the braking forces that happen when you're doing a squat. So for example, if I'm moving downward at a certain speed and then I stop really quickly, even if I'm going slow, but I stop quickly, the forces have to go up to have a change of momentum that is very fast. So I use them a lot of the time to control the amount of force that an athlete is seeing at the most provocative position. So in Dom's case, I'm using them to reintegrate squatting because he's been doing basically just posterior chain. He has a little bit of PFP issues. So we're basically bleeding in squatting in a very non-provocative way. Now, in terms of what I've done in the past and high performance sports, so as you guys know, I worked in track and field at Altis. I worked at Duke. I worked with Fabian Dielrud in Sweden, and I worked with Mike Young at Athletic Lab. So I have a lot of track and field experience, and we almost never use them. Almost never. We pretty much always are going to default to just a standard barbell back squat, and I think that this is advantageous because the loading is going to be significantly higher. The one time that we did use them, and Fabian's a slightly different situation, is when we would want to load the concentric portion and minimize the eccentric loading, and that's because the braking forces are going to be lower when you're actually sitting on the box. So we get more sore from eccentric loading. Eccentric loading is more provocative to the muscle and the tendon. It recruits more type 2 fibers. It can sometimes bother tendons if you load it really, really intensely. And even though it's a very strong indicator of success in things like sprinting and jumping, you don't want to overload it too much because you can get injuries. Sometimes you want to jump really, really high, and a box squat is a good way to ensure that you still have loading, but it's not something that's going to make you sore in your muscles or your tendons. We also know that eccentric loading makes you super sore. So if you're Dom and you just did, an hour of jumping and you haven't jumped in 6 weeks, it's going to make you incredibly sore. So that's the times that I like to use it and how I like to implement it. Now, I also use it with Fabian, and it's also for the same reason that you use it. And, well, two things. One, you can get really high rate of force developments isometrically and concentrically on the up phase. Specifically what Fabian does, he actually lifts up his feet and then hits the ground. So you're gonna have a small stretch shortening cycle there to generate a little bit of momentum, but the concentric RFD and isometric RFD is gonna go up a lot. You are gonna get more of the tendon involved in that activity, but as a high jumper, that's fine. I think the other thing is it's very controlled. So you can't cheat the depth, you can't really cheat, the range of motion in terms of like shifting the hips forward or backwards. It's a very standardized movement, which makes it really good in teaching guys early on. I think the reason it's so popular in powerlifting is because it is one of the easiest movements to learn, and it's one of the easiest ways to teach people how to squat. And I think powerlifters, being incredibly concentric dominant athletes, have to do it more frequently to be able to improve their concentric, not even rate of force development, just peak force. Yeah, just force. So you'll see it a lot of the times in those guys' programs, but you'll also notice that they're not very powerful. And that is probably the biggest downside, is they don't really train unless you're doing it with incredibly high velocities, meaning you're at sub-maximal loads, you're lifting very, very fast. You might even drop somewhat quickly to get higher eccentric forces. They're not going to train the things that we need if we're jumpers. So that's one of the bigger downsides. Any other use case that you can think of that you really, really like them? I think I did a pretty good job of covering them.
That covers it
So let's talk about, we'll kind of close on this real quick. If you're interested in coaching, go to hbstrength.com. We do program box squats. We program deep squats. We program deep slow squats. We program fast quarter squats, fast half squats. We cover the whole continuum. We leave no stones unturned. We make sure we address endurance, coordination, strength, speed, and mobility. And we do it in all different facets so you can improve human performance. You can ask any question in the chat to myself, Isaiah, Ben, Phil, Rich. We have tons of coaches there that are basically on call 24/7 to answer your questions, and you can send videos there for review. We are the best in the space, and I confidently...
And if you're wary, it's currently 90% off your first month.
It is 90% off, so go check it out. But I want to talk about pin squats, because I think oftentimes guys will see like pin squats in the program, or they'll see box squats in the program, and they don't really know what the difference is. So do you feel any difference between the two?
Yeah, pin squats, I like to use them when we want someone to start from the very, very bottom.
Like a bottoms up, or?
Basically that, a bottoms up variation. With a box squat, you have to lower down, and then you have to sustain the intra-abdominal pressure and all that loading on your back at the bottom. If you're not careful, it can be really bad for you. Like if you lose tension when you sit down at the bottom.
That's probably like, in terms of where the rubber meets the road with it, that's probably the most actionable or meaningful thing, like actually doing them. But intramuscularly, in terms of the muscle, I don't think it is really that different at all. And oftentimes I'll actually I'll put pin squats in instead of box squats. I think the other thing too is if you train at like a 24-hour fitness, or you're at LA Fitness or something like that, or any commercial gym. Dude, that is a big ass hawk. You see that thing?
Oh yeah.
He's chirping.
You can control the depth.
Yeah, you can control the depth, but it's also like safer. I think that box squats sometimes, for the reasons that you just stated, like, especially if you get stuck on a box squat, you can't really bail. There's nothing you can do. But a pin squat is like, you can push so hard out of the bottom when you're on the safeties, and there's really no risk, right? Like the forces are going to rise very linearly. There's not going to be shock loading, versus like, if you touch the box, your spine could absorb a lot of that. So that's maybe one of the downsides. So let's talk about when we would program these in terms of periodization, annually, macro cycle. When would you put them in an athlete's program?
I would put them in after, like right before doing a lot of heavy eccentric loading, and then after volume, after max strength work. That's where I would stick it in.
I obviously, load management, we use them for tendon pain. It can also be really, really good to control depth and those sorts of things. Right now, I'm helping an athlete who's got like 3 million followers on TikTok, and we're using them for his tendon progression for the same reason. It takes out the stress shortening, controls it, just makes things more clear and kind of cleanly cut in terms of the stimulus. But then I like to put them in early I think that they're very general. So they're not highly specific, meaning they don't mimic jumping a ton. If you've ever read the book Transfer of Training, it basically goes through all the exercises, and it says, like, these are the things that transfer the most to a given skill. And if you're going to look at jumping and box squats, they don't necessarily have a very high transfer of training, which means you're going to want them in very early on in a progression.
You could stick them in during a really specific cycle, though, to maintain that quality.
That was the other thing I was going to say is, like, after you get to, like, the 6-month mark, because we've done that with you where I'll essentially put them in at the end because I want to retain some of those strength capabilities.
Yeah,
and
like if I'm doing plyos or like even like you know those
Remember Zay
the drop squats, like the really light ones where you like and then jump.
like, I don't know if you remember this. There was a cycle where we did super maximal approaches.
Yeah.
Do you remember doing
Yeah,
box
I
squats
remember
during that?
My TFL was really messed up that cycle.
Yeah, that was before we
mean,
weren't sure if it was the quad. We weren't sure
I
if
didn't know it was like a tendon.
Yeah, it was really hard to tell, but I put them in during that to kind of balance the specific volume. And this is maybe another training law that I don't know if it's necessarily like stated, it's not like progressive overload or anything like that, but when things get really specific, you, like on the court or on the track, you can't get really specific in the weight room. Well, you can.
It's just risky.
Yeah, it's really risky. And so you have to, at some point, something has to give. And later in the year, when guys are trying to jump really high, it can be good to have them in, especially if you're not like, at super maximal loads. I think you could put them in heavier, but the risk is
like if you look at some of our most specific training cycles, if you look at it from like the outside in, like on Team Builder, the weight lifting looks really basic. But then you click on the plyo or whatever sprinting you're doing on the day, and that's where like I feel like the meat and potatoes is, and then the weight room is just to maintain essentially.
Yep, and I think that's
it'll be like 4x6, like quarter slow, like some like machine accessory work, and that's it.
There's like that cycle I was talking about, the Zay2 one. I think there was like single leg hops. There were like kind of drop split jumps, so it's like a drop and then you 1.5 reps, kind of like a 2-step squat, but you're doing it in the form of a plyo. So we'd go to the field, we'd hammer like those single leg hops, a little bit of bounding, and then you'd come back on the Tuesday session because we'd have it in a load management setup, and because of your TFL and your knee, and then we would do some paced box squats, right, where the loading is pretty low. So that's the podcast, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Go to hbstrength.com if you want to get coached by us and take advantage of all these advanced training methods.
Yes, sir.
See you guys.